The safe won't open. My father's journals are forgeries, every page rewriting my life as a lie. The security guard's boots thud closer down the hall, and I've got seconds before he finds me. The flash drive in my pocket is the only proof I'm not insane. If they take it, I disappear forever. The lock clicks. Too late. The door slams open, and Mike Evans fills the frame, his knuckles already bloody from the last time he tried to silence me. My father's voice echoes in my head. You were never stable. The walls close in. I'm running out of time. The heavy mahogany desk groaned as Ethan Miller pried it away from the paneled wall. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of afternoon light, smelling of old paper and cedar oil. He knelt, his knees cracking against the hardwood, and peeled away a loose corner of the Persian rug. The steel lid of the floor safe glinted, cold and unyielding. After 3 attempts, the tumblers clicked into place with a mechanical snap. Inside lay a stack of leather-bound journals. Ethan pulled the top volume out, the spine stiff and protesting. He traced the embossed gold initials on the cover, his own. His pulse throbbed against his collar as he flipped to a random page. The handwriting mimicked his childhood scrawl, yet the ink sat too dark, too fresh against the cream-colored parchment. June 12th, he whispered, his voice catching on the dry air. I broke the window today. Dad says I have a darkness inside. I'm scared of what I might do. Ethan gripped the edges of the book until the paper crinkled. He never broke a window. He never wrote these words. The entries detailed a history of violent outbursts and psychological instability he didn't recognize, all meticulously forged in his father's precise, sloping script. It was a roadmap of a madness that had never existed, a paper trail designed to bury him alive. The air in the study felt thick, tasting of copper and ancient dust. Ethan's thumb traced the dates: 1996, 1998, 2002. Every milestone of his life had been shadowed by a parallel dark history written by Thomas Miller. He looked at his watch. 3:30. He needed to move. He began the count under his breath, a rhythmic anchor against the rising tide of panic. 1, 2, 3. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, rhythmic and deliberate. Ethan shoved the journals into his satchel, the leather scraping against the safe's metal lip. He smoothed the rug over the hiding spot and shoved the desk into place. The brass handle of the study door turned. Thomas stood in the threshold, smelling of expensive scotch and peppermint. Searching for something, son? Thomas asked, tilting his head. A thin smile stretched across his face, never reaching his eyes. Ethan wiped his grimy palms on his slacks. A pen. I misplaced mine. Thomas stepped into the room, his polished shoes clicking on the floorboards with the finality of a gavel. You always were forgetful. It's a symptom, Ethan. We should discuss your medication. Thomas reached out, his hand hovering near Ethan's shoulder. Ethan flinched, the movement involuntary. The satchel felt heavy against his hip, a lead weight of evidence. He needed to get out of the house, away from the suffocating scent of peppermint and the predatory stillness of his father's gaze. I need some air, Ethan said, his voice sounding thin even to his own ears. I'll be back for dinner. Will you? Thomas straightened his silk tie. 1, 2, 3. The gates are heavy, Ethan. Don't strain yourself. Ethan brushed past him, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He didn't look back. He focused on the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted every step, a mechanical ritual to ensure the world didn't tilt beneath his feet. He reached the library on the first floor, intending to cut through to the side exit. The room was a cavern of shadows, the walls lined with books that Thomas had collected but never read. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the corner. Mike Evans, the security guard Thomas had hired under the guise of protection, stepped into the light. Mike was a mountain of a man, his neck wider than his head, his buzz cut catching the dim light. He stood with his arms crossed, blocking the path to the door. "Mr. Miller wants you to stay inside," Mike said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Ethan's chest. "Move out of the way, Mike," Ethan replied, his hand tightening on the strap of his satchel. Mike didn't move. Instead, he began to pick at his cuticles, his thumb digging into the flesh until a small bead of blood appeared. It was a nervous habit that signaled a looming explosion. "I have my orders. You aren't well, Ethan. You need to rest." Mike lunged. He didn't move like a man of his size. He was a blur of gray fabric and heavy muscle. Ethan spun away, his shoes skidding on the polished floor. Mike's hand caught the edge of the satchel, the leather groaning under the strain. "Give it to me," Mike grunted, his breath smelling of stale coffee and cigarettes. Ethan swung the satchel, using the weight of the journals as a club. The bag connected with Mike's jaw with a dull thud. The big man staggered, his eyes widening in surprise. Ethan didn't wait. He scrambled toward the mahogany desk, his fingers searching for a weapon. His hand closed around a heavy brass bookend, a stylized lion, cold and sharp. Mike recovered quickly, his face twisting into a mask of rage. He roared, a sound that felt like a physical blow, and charged. Ethan ducked, the air from Mike's swing whistling over his head. As Mike overextended, Ethan swung the brass lion with everything he had. The metal bit into Mike's temple. The guard went down hard, his head hitting the edge of the desk before he slumped to the floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stood over him, chest heaving, the brass lion dripping a dark, viscous red onto the Persian rug. He dropped the bookend. It landed with a heavy clatter that seemed to echo through the entire house. He didn't check for a pulse. He grabbed his satchel and ran. He burst through the side door, the cold Connecticut air hitting his face like a slap. He scrambled into his rental car, his hands shaking so violently he struggled to fit the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he tore down the gravel driveway, the tires spitting stones against the undercarriage. He drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see black SUVs cresting the hill behind him. He needed a plan. He needed a lawyer. He needed someone who wasn't in his father's pocket. He pulled into the parking lot of a secluded diner on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered, the silver kettle, casting a sickly green glow over the cracked asphalt. He killed the engine and sat in the dark, the silence of the car pressing in on him. He began to count. 1, 2, 3. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Johnson. "Where are you? We need to talk, now." Sarah was the only person he trusted. They had grown up together. Two kids trapped in the orbit of powerful, demanding fathers. She had become a lawyer to fight the system, while he had become a venture capitalist to buy it. Now, they were both drowning in it. He met her in a corner booth, the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions hanging heavy in the air. Sarah looked exhausted, her thick-rimmed glasses sliding down her nose, her fingers restlessly tapping a small sugar packet. "Ethan, thank God," she whispered, leaning across the table. "I just got word. Your father filed the papers an hour ago. Emergency conservatorship. He's claiming you're a danger to yourself and others." Ethan felt a cold void open in his stomach. He's using the journals, Sarah. He forged years of them. He's been planning this for decades. It's worse than that, Sarah said, her voice dropping lower. He's got a medical backing, a signed psychiatric evaluation. If the police find you, they won't take you to jail. They'll take you to a locked ward. Once you're in, Thomas has total control over your assets, your legal standing, everything. Ethan reached into his satchel and pulled out a small flash drive. I digitized the journals before I left. These are the proof. The ink is too fresh, the handwriting is a caricature. I need to get this to someone who can verify it. Not yet, Sarah warned. If you show your hand now, he'll bury you. We need a safe place for that drive, and we need to find out who signed that evaluation. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. I know a place. A public locker at the train station. No cameras in the back corner. I'll drop it there and meet you at your office in the morning. Be careful, Ethan, she said, her eyes filled with a weary kind of pity. He's not just your father anymore. He's the law in this county. Ethan left the diner, the cold wind biting through his jacket. He drove to the station, his movements mechanical. He found the locker, shoved the drive inside, and turned the key. He felt a brief moment of victory, a small spark of hope. He had the evidence. He was one step ahead. As he turned to leave, the station's fluorescent lights hummed, a low-pitched vibration that made his teeth ache. He walked toward the exit, his mind already calculating the next move. Subverted beat 1.4. Ethan reached the glass double doors of the station, his hand already reaching for the handle. He felt a surge of genuine confidence. The flash drive was secure, a digital ticking time bomb that would shatter his father's carefully constructed lie. He had acted logically, decisively. By separating himself from the physical evidence, he had ensured that even if he were detained, the truth remained hidden, waiting for Sarah to retrieve it. This was the smart play, the venture capitalist's move, hedging his bets and diversifying his risks. He took a deep breath, the cold air feeling like a victory. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, a patrol car pulled up to the curb, its blue and red lights painting the snow in violent hues. Ethan didn't run. Running would look like guilt. He stood his ground, his posture rigid, his expression neutral. He was Ethan Miller. He was a man of substance. He could handle a simple police inquiry. Two officers stepped out of the car. One of them, a veteran with a thick mustache, nodded toward him. Mr. Miller, we've been looking for you. Your father is very worried. There was an incident at the house. I'm fine, officer, Ethan said, his voice steady. It was a misunderstanding. I'm on my way to meet my attorney. The officer smiled, a sympathetic, almost fatherly expression. Of course. We just need to make sure you're okay. Dr. Reed is waiting at the station. He just wants to have a quick chat, make sure your levels are right. Standard procedure when a conservatorship is filed. Ethan felt his shoulders drop slightly. Dr. Robert Reed, the family physician, the man who had treated Ethan's scraped knees and childhood fevers. Reed had always been a neutral party, a man of science who remained outside Thomas's political games. If Reed was involved, it meant there was a chance for a fair medical assessment. He could explain the situation to Reed, show him the marks on his arms from the struggle with Mike, and get a professional to vouch for his sanity. I'll go with you, Ethan said. If Dr. Reed is there, I'm happy to clear this up. He climbed into the back of the patrol car, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. The system was moving, but it was moving toward a resolution. He had the drive hidden, and he had a friendly doctor waiting. The crisis was being managed. The police station smelled of floor wax and stale tobacco. They led him to a small private interview room where Dr. Reed sat at a metal table, his white lab coat slightly yellowed at the cuffs. Reed looked up, his eyes kind behind his spectacles. He cracked his knuckles, crack, 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 and began to hum a low, haunting melody. "Ethan," Reed said softly, "I'm so sorry it's come to this. Your father told me about the library, about the bookend." "It was self-defense, Robert," Ethan said, leaning forward. "Mike attacked me. I found the journals. My father is forging a history of mental illness to take my firm. You have to believe me. You've known me my whole life." Reed stopped humming. He looked down at a file on the table. "I have known you, Ethan. That's why this is so difficult." He turned the file around. It was a formal psychiatric evaluation dated 3 days ago. It detailed a progressive decline in cognitive function, paranoid delusions regarding family members, and tendencies toward unprovoked violence. At the bottom of the page, in bold, black ink, was Dr. Robert Reed's signature. The air left Ethan's lungs. You signed this 3 days ago? I haven't even seen you in 6 months." "The symptoms were reported by multiple witnesses, Ethan," Reed said, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth. "Your aunt, your father's staff, and now this assault on Mike Evans. It confirms the diagnosis." "He's paying you," Ethan hissed, the world beginning to tilt. "What does he have on you, Robert? The malpractice suit from 10 years ago? The one Thomas buried?" Reed's face went pale, but his voice remained flat. "I'm sorry, Ethan. But based on my professional evaluation, you are a danger to yourself. I've recommended immediate commitment to the Hillcrest facility." The door opened, and 2 orderlies in white scrubs stepped in. They weren't police. They were private security from the facility. Ethan lunged for the door, but they were on him in seconds. A sharp prick in his neck, a needle, and the room began to dissolve into a gray fog. As he slumped into the chair, the last thing he heard was the rhythmic crack, crack, crack of Reed's knuckles and the low funeral dirge humming in the doctor's throat. He hadn't just lost his freedom. He had handed himself over to the very men who had built his cage. The flash drive was in a locker he could no longer reach, and the only man who could testify to his sanity had just signed his death warrant. The fog didn't lift for 2 days. When Ethan finally clawed his way back to consciousness, he was in a room that was too white, too bright, and smelled of industrial bleach. His limbs felt like lead, his thoughts moving through a thick, syrupy haze. He tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea sent him reeling back onto the thin, plastic-covered mattress. He began to count. 1, 2. His mind stalled. He couldn't find 3. The drug was a wall, a barrier between him and the precision he needed to survive. A nurse entered, her expression a mask of professional indifference. She set a small plastic cup of pills on the bedside table. "Time for your medication, Mr. Miller." "I don't want it," Ethan croaked. "It's not a request," she replied. "It's court-ordered." He looked at the pills. They were his father's will in chemical form. If he took them, the counting would stop forever. The precision would die. He waited until she turned her back to check his chart, then shoved the pills under his tongue. When she turned back, he mimed swallowing and opened his mouth. "Good boy," she said, and left. He spat the pills into the palm of his hand and tucked them into a tier in the mattress. He needed his mind. He needed to find a way out. 2 days later, Sarah Johnson arrived. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching her legal binders like a shield. They sat in a small courtyard surrounded by 10-foot fences topped with razor wire. "I can't get you out, Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. The judge signed the freeze. "Your accounts are locked." I tried to use my own firm's retainer, but Thomas filed a conflict of interest motion. "No bank will touch you. You're legally a ghost." Ethan leaned in, the cold metal of the bench biting into his thighs. "The drive, Sarah. Did you get the drive?" Sarah looked away. "The police searched the station, Ethan. They found the locker key in your personal effects at the station. They took the drive. It's gone." Ethan closed his eyes. The one smart move he'd made had been turned against him. He was broke, drugged, and his evidence was in the hands of the man who wanted him erased. "There's more," Sarah said. "I went to your apartment to get some of your clothes. The door was unlocked. I found this on your pillow." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, broken wooden soldier. Its head was snapped off, the paint chipped and fading. Ethan felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. It was a toy from his 7th birthday, the day he had fallen down the stairs. "He was in my home," Ethan whispered. "He's telling me he can get to me anywhere." "He's trying to break you before the hearing," Sarah said. "He wants you to walk into that courtroom looking like the monster he's described in those journals. If you snap, if you start counting or yelling about conspiracies, it's over. You'll be under his thumb for the rest of your life." "I won't snap," Ethan said, his voice gaining a sudden, hard edge. "I'm going to find Martha, your aunt. Ethan, she's the one who gave the statement to Reed. She's on his side. She's the only one who knows the truth about the summer of '94, Ethan said. "The journals say I was in a clinic in Vermont that July. But I wasn't. I was with her. If I can get her to admit that, the whole timeline collapses. The journals become what they are, fictions." "How are you going to get to her?" Sarah asked. "You're in a locked facility?" Ethan looked at the gate, where a delivery truck was backing in. "I'm a venture capitalist, Sarah. I know how to spot a gap in the market. And right now, the security in this place is over-leveraged on cameras and underinvested in physical presence." The escape was a blur of adrenaline and desperation. He waited for the shift change, the 1 3-minute window when the guards in the booth were distracted by the arrival of the dinner carts. He slipped into the back of the laundry truck, the smell of damp linen and bleach filling his lungs. He lay flat against the floor, his heart hammering against the metal, counting every second. 1, 2, 3. The truck hit a pothole, and Ethan was tossed against the side. He bit his tongue to keep from crying out. The vehicle slowed, the gates groaned open, and then they were moving. He waited until he felt the truck accelerate onto the main road before he rolled out the back. He hit the asphalt hard, the impact jarring his teeth. He scrambled into the woods, the shadows of the Connecticut trees swallowing him whole. He was a fugitive now, a man with no name and no money, hunted by his own father. He found a payphone at a gas station 3 miles away. He tried to use his credit card to call a cab, but the machine beeped a shrill, mocking tone. Declined. He tried another card. Declined. Every cent he had ever earned, every bit of his hard-won independence, had been severed with a single court order. He began to walk. The trek to Martha's cabin took 2 days. He moved through the backwoods, avoiding the main roads, sleeping in abandoned barns and drinking from cold mountain streams. The precision of his old life was gone, replaced by a raw, primal need for survival. He reached the cabin at dusk. It was a small, weather-beaten structure tucked into a jagged fold of the hills. Smoke curled from the chimney, smelling of pine and wood smoke. He stepped onto the porch, his knees cracking. Martha opened the door. She looked older than he remembered, her face a map of pained expressions and heavy sighs. She saw him and immediately began to apologize to the doorframe. "Oh, so sorry, excuse me. I didn't mean to let the cold in." "Aunt Martha?" Ethan said, his voice raspy. "I need your help." She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Ethan, my poor boy. Thomas said you were unwell." "Thomas is lying," Ethan said, stepping into the warmth of the cabin. "The journals, Martha. He says I was in Vermont in '94. You know that's a lie. I was here. We went to the lake every day. You have the photos, you have the records." Martha sank into a chair, her heavy gold jewelry clinking. "It was so long ago, Ethan. My memory isn't what it used to be." "Don't do this," Ethan pleaded. "He's trying to take everything. If you testify, if you show the court the truth, he can't win." Martha looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I have them. In the cellar. The old scrapbooks. They'll prove you were here." Ethan felt a surge of hope. This was it. The breaking point. He followed her toward the cellar door, his mind already rehearsing the testimony. Suddenly, the sound of tires on gravel shattered the silence. Headlights swept across the cabin walls, bright and intrusive. "He's here," Martha whispered, her voice trembling. The door burst open. Thomas Miller stepped into the room, followed by Mike Evans, his head bandaged, his eyes burning with a cold, predatory light. Thomas didn't look like a man who had suffered a stroke. He stood tall, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his silk tie straightened. 1, 2, 3. "Ethan," Thomas said, his voice echoing with the finality of a gavel. "You've caused quite a stir. Running away from your doctors? It's a very poor look for the record." "The record is a lie, Thomas," Ethan spat. "Martha is going to tell the truth." Thomas looked at Martha. She shrank back, her hand moving to her throat. "Martha, tell the truth? We've already discussed the truth, haven't we, sister?" He turned back to Ethan, a thin smile stretching across his face. "You see, Ethan, the problem with relying on family is that family can be expensive. And I have always been a better provider than you." Thomas nodded to Mike. The big man stepped forward, a canister of gasoline in his hand. "No!" Ethan lunged, but Mike was faster. He shoved Ethan back against the wall, the force of the blow knocking the wind out of him. Mike began to pour the liquid over the stacks of old newspapers and books in the corner. The smell of accelerant filled the room, sharp and terrifying. "The records are a fire hazard, Ethan," Thomas said calmly. "It's a tragedy, really. An unstable man, a grieving aunt, a freak accident in the woods. The court will find it very moving." Mike struck a match. The flames erupted with a roar, the dry wood of the cabin hungrily devouring the light. Ethan scrambled toward Martha, grabbing her arm as the smoke began to fill the room. He dragged her toward the back window, the heat searing his skin. "The cellar!" Martha screamed. "The records!" "They're gone!" Ethan yelled over the roar of the fire. "We have to go." He smashed the window with a chair and shoved Martha through. He scrambled after her, falling into the cold dirt as the cabin behind them became a pyre. He looked up, expecting to see Thomas and Mike waiting. But the driveway was empty. The black SUV was gone. Thomas had what he wanted. The evidence was ash. Ethan turned to Martha, who was sitting on the ground, coughing and sobbing. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're alive. We can still fight this. You can still tell the judge what you know." Martha looked up at him. The pained expression was gone, replaced by something harder, something colder. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, sleek recording device. Subverted beat. 3.4. Ethan reached out to comfort her, his hand trembling from the heat of the fire. "It's over, Martha. He tried to kill us, but we're still here. Your testimony is all I need. Your word against his. The judge will have to listen when they see what he did to your home." He felt a strange sense of clarity, a renewed purpose. The physical destruction of the evidence was a setback, yes, but the human element, the witness, was still intact. He felt a surge of protective love for this woman who had risked everything to help him. They would go to the police together. They would end this tonight. Martha didn't take his hand. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her skirt with a slow, deliberate motion. She wasn't shaking anymore. She looked at the burning ruins of her cabin with a strange, detached interest. "You always were a dreamer, Ethan," she said. Her voice was no longer the wavering, apologetic sigh of a victim. It was sharp, clear, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Just like your mother, always looking for the hero in the story." Ethan frowned, a cold prickle of unease dancing across his skin. "Martha, what are you talking about? We need to get to a phone. We need to call Sarah." "I already called," Martha said. She held up the recording device. "But not Sarah. I called the court clerk. I submitted my final statement an hour before you arrived. Thomas wanted to make sure the timing was perfect." She pressed a button on the device. A video began to play on the small screen. It was Martha, sitting in a well-lit office, her hair perfectly done, her expression one of deep, maternal sorrow. "My nephew, Ethan Miller, has been struggling for a long time," the video Martha said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I've seen the violent breaks. I've seen him talk to people who aren't there. That summer of '94, he wasn't with me. He was in a private facility in Vermont. I helped Thomas cover it up back then to protect the family name. But I can't lie anymore. He's dangerous. He needs help." Ethan felt the world tilt. The heat from the cabin seemed to vanish, replaced by a freezing, suffocating void. You lied. You took the money." "Thomas paid off my mortgage 10 years ago, Ethan," Martha said, her voice flat. "He's been paying for my lifestyle, my jewelry, my travel. Do you think a woman like me survives on a pension? Thomas is the foundation of this family. You're just a branch that grew too far from the trunk. You needed to be pruned." She looked at him then, and for the first time, Ethan saw the true architect of his betrayal. She hadn't been a victim. She had been the lure. The proof in the cellar had never existed. The cabin fire wasn't an attempt to kill her. It was a staged event to ensure Ethan was caught at the scene of an arson committed during a psychotic break. "He didn't just buy your silence," Ethan whispered, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. "He bought your soul. He bought my survival," Martha countered. She looked past him as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. The police were coming, not to save him, but to collect him. "You should have just signed the papers, Ethan. It would have been so much easier for everyone." She began to scream then, a high-pitched, practiced sound of terror. She threw herself onto the ground, tearing at her clothes, making it look like Ethan had attacked her. "Help! Help me! He's out of control! He set the fire!" Ethan stood frozen, the orange light of the flames dancing in his eyes. He had nothing. No money, no witness, and now, a fresh crime to answer for. He looked at Martha, the woman he had just saved, and realized that in the world his father had built, there were no heroes. There were only those who held the pen, and those who were written out of the story. The courthouse holding room was a box of white marble and cold light. Ethan sat on a wooden bench, his hands cuffed behind his back, his head bowed. He didn't count. The numbers were gone. There was only the silence. The door opened. Thomas Miller stepped in. He looked refreshed, triumphant. He sat across from Ethan and straightened his tie. 1, 2, 3. "It's over, Ethan," Thomas said. "The judge has reviewed Martha's statement. The commitment order is being finalized. I'll be taking over the management of your firm starting Monday. It's a shame, really. I'll have to liquidate most of the assets to cover the legal fees and your long-term care." Ethan looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, his face smudged with soot. "You don't care about the money, do you? You have enough." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes cold and unblinking. "It's not about the money. It's about the legacy. You are becoming too independent, Ethan. Your modern investments, your refusal to play the game. You were tarnish on the family name. I'm going to use your wealth to fund the Miller Foundation for Judicial Excellence. My name will be on every law school in the country. Yours will be a footnote in a medical journal." Ethan stared at him. He looked at the way Thomas held himself, the absolute certainty in his gaze. And then he saw it, the crack in the perfection. "The summer of '94, Ethan said softly. Thomas sighed. "We've been over this. You were in Vermont? Martha confirmed it?" "No," Ethan said, a spark of his old precision returning. "You're right. Martha did confirm it. But you forgot one thing, Thomas. You're a perfectionist. You tried to scrub the record, but you only scrubbed the things you could see." "What are you talking about?" "The London trip," Ethan said. "July 1994. You were so focused on the Vermont clinic records that you forgot I wasn't even in the country. I was at a junior tennis tournament in London. I lost in the first round. I was a nobody." Thomas laughed. "A tournament? Who's going to remember a junior tournament from 30 years ago?" "The London Times," Ethan replied. "They did a feature on the International Youth of Sport. There's a photograph, a wide shot of the opening ceremony. I'm in the third row. I'm wearing a hat. But the bib, number 422, is registered to me. It's a physical, printed record. Thousands of copies exist in libraries all over the world. You can't burn them all, Thomas. All." Thomas's smile flickered. He straightened his tie again. 1, 2. He stopped at 3. "I'm a venture capitalist," Ethan said, his voice gaining strength. "I know how to find the one variable that crashes the entire model. You built a perfect lie, but you built it on a foundation that doesn't exist. If I was in London on July 14th, I couldn't have been in Vermont. And if the Vermont records are a lie, then the journals are a lie. And if the journals are a lie, then your entire case is perjury." Ethan stood up. He looked at the camera in the corner of the room. "I know you're watching, Judge Martinez. You like things to be flush, don't you? You like the edges to be perfect. Well, look at the edges of this case. They don't line up." The hearing was a massacre. Sarah Johnson, alerted by a final, desperate email Ethan had sent from the courthouse library, arrived with the digitized archive of the London Times. When the photograph was projected onto the screen, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Martinez leaned forward, her ruler tapping rhythmically against her notepad. "Mr. Miller," she said, looking at Thomas. Can you explain how the plaintiff was in two places at once? Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came out. He reached for his tie. 1, 2, 3, 4. He couldn't stop. He kept pulling at the silk until his face went purple. The case was dismissed with prejudice. Ethan walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. The media was already swarming Thomas, the legendary judge, now a disgraced forger. Ethan didn't stop to talk to them. He didn't look back. He moved to Oregon 3 months later. He bought a small house on the coast, where the roar of the Pacific drowned out the ticking of clocks and the echoes of his father's voice. He opened a small legal clinic, a place for people who had been silenced by the systems that were supposed to protect them. He sat in his office one evening, looking at a photo on his desk. It wasn't the London photo. It was a picture of him and Sarah, taken years ago, before the world had become a series of numbers and traps. He reached out and touched the frame. He didn't count the corners. He didn't check the alignment. He just looked at it. The floor was solid. The air was clear. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Miller didn't need to know exactly how many steps were beneath him. He was already home.